So last time we were looking at the different body planes that exist in order to see internally different parts of the body. This will include the sagittal plane that runs from superior to inferior. Then we have a plane that is called transverse or cross section that runs laterally from left lateral to right lateral. And then we have another section that runs from superior to inferior, but instead of dividing the body in its anterior view, which is the front, what you can see, it just runs on the lateral side. So then, because of this, sagittal section divides the body into right and left. And then frontal or coronal divides the body into anterior and posterior. And then that cross section, the one that runs like this, it divides our body into inferior and superior. And there are different applications of when do you want to do these sections. Sometimes it is useful, like to see, for instance, both fields of the lungs rather than just one, the right or the left. In this case, you can ask either from a frontal section, if you want to see the entire lung, like from apex up to base, or if you want to see just a certain portion of the lungs, maybe near to where the primary bronchi divides into secondary bronchi, that's when you ask for a cross section. So it depends on what do you want to see. So then we use some medical imaging, MRIs and CT scans. However, in real life, I mean, when a doctor performs a surgery, it can do a mid-sagittal incision, for instance, to look at the entire contents of the abdomen, if it's necessary. But what about if it's just appendicitis? Well, in this case, we'll do a parasagittal incision on the right side. And it will be a tiny incision, just to take out the appendix. Okay, and then there is another section, actually, another plane that is called oblique. Now that I think about it. Oblique is a section that runs in an angle. So you can run this way. So here are some views of these planes. So here is the frontal, which is also known as coronal. So this one runs sideways. And this is actually an image of an MRI with the view of both hemispheres of the brain. This is on the head. So these are the bones of the head, and this is the brain. So here's the right hemisphere, this is the left hemisphere, and in between the hemispheres, we have some cavities that hold cerebrospinal fluid. These are called ventricles. So these two are the lateral ventricles. This is the third ventricle. And then something else that you can see here is the midbrain. And then in here, this will be the area that corresponds to the face. So you have several muscles in there, and then the nasal cavity. So, and sometimes, like if you want to see the MRI at a certain level, you run, because actually typically when they perform the MRIs, in this case for the frontal coronal, they take from nose up to the occipital lobe, occipital bone. And then when you run the software, the computer, you can go through the stacks, and then you can find the location of that organ that you're interested in. Let's say that someone has a tumor around this area. So in order to see that tumor, the doctor or the radiologist, they have to run the scan from here and stop here, and then see what is going on perhaps in that area. Okay, so that's what they do. And sometimes they can go from start to end, so that they can find exactly what will be the potential shape. Like sometimes if you start in this area where the tumor is, you see the stack? Well, the only thing that you will be able to see will be something like this. And you can say, wow, what a little tumor, right? But if you go deeper, like if these were the scans, and then this will be the ending of the tumor, well, as you move through the stacks, this is becoming bigger and bigger, and up to when you reach here, and then you will know exactly. And then with three-dimensional imaging, you can even see like this lateral view, or the superior view and the inferior view. So that's the frontal. Transverse or cross-section basically divides the brain or any other organ into a superior and inferior region. In this case, this imaging is from a transverse section of the brain. And if you see, it looks very different from this. So here you can see the superior view. So these are the hemispheres of the brain. And here is kind of the initial portion of the cerebellum. Here's the nasal cavity. What are these two white balls there? The eyeballs, the eyes. In MRIs and also in CT scans, this can be any. And also in X-rays, denser tissue is seen as white color. Less dense tissue because it allows the passing of the waves of energy. In the case of CT scan or the X-rays is the radiation. It allows the crossing less dense tissues, including air. It lets the passage of these rays really quickly. So when it goes and exposes the film, or in this case, nowadays it's digital generated films. Basically, what you can see is anything that is less dense, like in this case, this will be cerebrospinal fluid, that will be dark color, and the white color represents dense tissue, including the eyes. So in between the eyes, of course, we have the nose, and in the nose we have mostly air. We have some bones and cartilage, but you can see them in here. And that's the tip of the nose. And what is surrounding the head? Air. That's why it's seen in dark color. Sagittal, in this case we have two sections. Seen in this complete body, mid-sagittal divides your body into equal right and left, and right parasagittal, that it gives you, of course, if it's going to the right, it will be kind of not as wide right side versus a wider left side. So in this case, you have more of the left than the right. And this is what you can see in the brain. And as well, you can see part of the mouth here and the nose. And of course, this is the mid-sagittal section showing you the medial view of the hemispheres. This is the lateral ventricles. This is the cerebellum. The cerebellum is a tiny organ behind our brain and a little bit lower to the brain that help us to maintain equilibrium when we are walking or when we are performing body movements, allow us to have kind of smooth movement in our limbs. Questions with the sections or planes? Oblique sections can be used in imaging as well. An example may be a kind of an imaging that's called Caldwell, that it helps you to see better the nasal sinuses, paranasal sinuses, just to see if you have a problem in the sinuses. Okay, so other sections, combination of sections in regions of the body to see internal organs. So here we have a mid-sagittal section that runs from the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a muscle that divides the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. So this one will run from the diaphragm up to the pubic symphysis. In our pelvic bones, we have the joint of the right and the left pubic bones that is called pubic symphysis. So this line, this mid-sagittal line, runs from the diaphragm into the pubic symphysis, and then we have a line that runs transversely, basically from the lower part of our ribs that attaches into the sternum. So with this, we form 4 quadrants, or major regions, which are called abdominopelvic quadrants, because it subdivides the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. And it is dividing it into 4 quadrants, 4 major quadrants. RUQ, or right upper quadrant, LUQ, or left upper quadrant, RLQ, or right lower quadrant, and LLQ, or left lower quadrant. It is a major subdivision, and with this major subdivision, something that you can see is underneath the presence of particular organs, and that can give a clue of what is wrong or what organ might be damaged. So, right upper quadrant, what you can see here, it is this large organ, which is the largest organ in our body. That's the liver. You can see most of the liver. This is the right lobe of the liver. And underneath this right lobe, we have the gallbladder. So if someone has cholecystitis or inflammation of the gallbladder, the pain is going to be felt in the right upper quadrant. Okay? So then something that you can see here as well, it is this tiny portion that connects to the stomach, which is this. This is called the duodenum or duodenum. And then you can see part of the large intestine, which is this, that is called the hepatic flexure, transverse colon, and then the ascending colon. And then what you can see on the left upper quadrant? Well, the left lobe of the liver, then the stomach, and the other half of the transverse colon, which is this, and then the spleen, which is a little bit to the left and behind the stomach, and then you have the splenic flexure, which is part of the colon. It's like a part that goes down or turns down, and then you see part of the descending colon. So if someone gets an injury, let's say the person is driving and he receives a crash, and is the driver on the left side, and then the person have a hit in this left upper quadrant, and then the person loses conscious, it has very low pressure, low blood pressure, more than likely the spleen is ruptured. And also that can happen in athletes. They receive a tackle on the left, or maybe a boxer, and then it has sudden drop of the blood pressure, and then the person faints. Maybe is the spleen bleeding. It's a very bloody organ, so the person needs to go really quick to the OR before the person dies. Then right lower quadrant, you can see ascending colon, part of the loops of the intestine, the what will be the ileum, and then of course the right side of the urinary bladder, and then in this portion of the ascending colon nearby, it is the appendix, the vermiform appendix. Left side of the abdominal pelvic cavity will be the left lower quadrant. You can see part of the loops of small intestine, which will include the jejunum, descending colon, descending colon, and then the left half of the urinary bladder. Now, if it's a female, then of course will be left ovary, right ovary here, and then half of the uterus, right half, left half. Any questions? Okay. So then there is a more precise subdivision of the abdominal pelvic cavity into which you just have two parasagittal lines that are actually called mid-clavicular lines. The collarbone here is called the clavicle. And these two lines runs more or less in the middle of the clavicle, like this. And actually they run through the nipple area. So this will be the right and the left mid-clavicular lines. And then you have another section that runs a little bit more above the previous one, which actually, now that I think about it, I mentioned to you that it runs here in the lower part of the ribs. No, this one runs more or less like in the navel area. But this one actually, yes, runs along the lower margin of our ribs, the upper transverse. And then the lower transverse, it runs laterally from side to side along the anatomical marking that is called anterior superior iliac spine. When we start talking about the bones, you will know where it is. But basically it runs like this, the other one like this, and then we have regions. And these regions will be more precise to locate specific organs. Now, then because this one, which is in the middle, it's called epigastric region, is, well, just naming. This in the middle, the upper part, is called epigastric region. And then to the right and to the left of the epigastric regions, we have two regions that are called hypochondriac. And these are called hypochondriac because they are just below the costal cartilage. The ribs are called costae. And then the cartilage, which is a soft, semi-soft tissue, is not as hard as bone, but it's called cartilage and it's precursor of bone in most instances. So this is called chondros. So hypochondrial region will be kind of below the cartilage. So we have right and left. And then on the sides, well, below the epigastric region, in the middle, we have the umbilical region. It's called umbilical because it's around the navel. And then on the sides of the umbilical region, we have the left and the right lumbar regions. And the right and the left lumbar regions are more specific for, especially here in the back, of course, for whenever someone has a problem with the kidneys, because that's where we have the kidneys, in the lumbar region. And then epigastric region, someone might have pain in that area. And perhaps the person drinks a lot of soda, coffee, takes aspirin or ibuprofen. That irritates or upsets the stomach. Or someone may eat a lot of spicy food. So that can pinpoint to gastritis. On the right side, the right hypochondriac, Someone has pain there, very likely is something related with the liver. More than likely will be with certain risk factors will be the gallbladder. Okay, and then below the umbilical we have the hypogastric region. Females in reproductive stage during the previous days before menses or during menses have pain here in the hypogastric region. It is the cramps that are felt in this area. Sometimes they can go into the right and left iliac region bilaterally. Now, pain in the right iliac region, more than likely, it is referring to pain in the appendix. Of course, if the person has appendix. There's no such thing as having a pain like similar to appendicitis if you don't have it, if they already took it out from you. Anyway, any questions? Okay, so in the abdomen and in the thorax, we have major cavities, but we also have other cavities in our body, like the cavity that holds our brain, the cavity that holds our vertebra. And they're subdivided into two major categories. So ventral body cavities will be located anteriorly, dorsal body cavities posteriorly. And then we have minor cavities as well. So the dorsal body cavity, which is dorsal or posterior, is subdivided into cranial and vertebral. Cranial holds the brain, vertebral holds the spinal cord. Dorsal body cavities are surrounded by bones. And then ventral body cavities, we have thoracic and abdominopelvic. Thoracic, it's above the diaphragm, abdominopelvic below the diaphragm. Out of the two, the one that it is surrounded by bones will be thoracic. Abdominopelvic, partially, it is surrounded by bones. I mean, well, not surrounded, it's protected more than surrounded, but at least we have the vertebrae here in this region, in the abdominal cavity, but then the pelvic cavity, it is protected by the coxal bones. And then we have some body cavities that are surrounded by membranes, like the meninges. So these meninges surround and protect the brain and the spinal cord. Pleural membranes surround and protect our lungs. Pericardium surrounds and protect the heart. And synovial membranes protects the ending of bones. Now, any questions? So now, let's look at some whys. Why the dorsal body cavities are made by bones, by the vertebrae and by the bones of the skull. Why do you think is that? Yes, for protection. The brain and the spinal cord are very important for life. So we need to have a lot of protection. Now, in the dorsal body cavities, in the ventral body cavities, we have the thoracic and we have the abdominal. Why the abdominal? It is not completely surrounded by bones, but the thoracic it is. For what?
You tend to have more fat as protection around the abdominal pelvic, and the organs possibly aren't as necessary as in the thoracic.
Yes, so our organs in the abdominal cavity are not as important. And imagine if we will have encased the entire abdominal cavity with bones. Can we do this? No. We won't be able to do that. We'll be like snakes. So what organs do we have in the thoracic body cavity then that needs to be protected with bones? Heart and lungs. And now, at least this applies for females, but not for males. Our pelvic cavity, it is surrounded by these bones that protects in us the ovaries and the uterus. If we didn't have that protection, do you think we all will be here? No? How many years in the life of a female she can reproduce, had the chance to reproduce? Start counting, like let's say from age 14 up to when she cannot reproduce anymore. Yeah, like 35 years or so. That's the lifespan for reproduction for us, right? Females. Males, can they reproduce even at their 80s? Yes. How many days in the month they can reproduce? Every single day. That's crazy. Females, once we have children, once we are pregnant, we have to wait at least minimum a year to reproduce again, right? So, nothing against you guys, but who's more important for reproduction? Yes, we are. We're more fragile, okay? So that's why we have these bones and also this fat pad that sometimes we don't like, but we have it for a reason, for protecting our uterus and our ovaries. As once was told by me by our dermatology professor, and she was right. Now I understand it. So here is the transverse section of the thoracic cavities, and then the thoracic cavity is subdivided into minor cavities like the mediastinum or pericardial cavity, where we have not only the heart, in the case of the pericardium, of course, we only have the heart, but in the mediastinum, which is the space between the right and the left lungs, let me just write it down here, or mediastinum, I don't know, some people may say it better than me. So this mediastinum or mediastinum basically holds the heart, that's the only organ that you can see there, but also the great blood vessels that attaches into the heart, and in the case of young people, like from their 17 and below, they have the thymus, which is an organ of immunity, of the immune system. And then in here, we have the membranes, like the pericardium that surrounds the heart, and here we have the pleural membranes that surrounds and protect the lungs. And then behind the pericardial cavity, behind the heart, we have the esophagus, and then we have the aorta, which is the largest and most important artery in our body, and then we have the vertebrae. And then in the back, of course, we have these muscles, same laterally and anteriorly. And then we have the sternum in here. So that's what you can see in this transverse section. Now, in the sagittal, mid-sagittal section, where you can see the organs of the abdominal cavity, in the abdominal cavity, we have these membranes that are called peritoneal membranes. So this cavity, the peritoneal cavity, so it has two layers, just like as most cavities or in our body, we have 2 or 3 layers depending. But this that actually surrounds the entire cavity itself is called the parietal peritoneum. Parietal means wall. So here is the mid-sagittal view of the parietal peritoneum, and this parietal peritoneum reflects or bounces back and then starts surrounding all the different organs, including the loops of intestine, large intestine, small intestine, the stomach, which is here, and the liver. And any organ behind this peritoneum is going to be called retroperitoneal organ. And anything internally to the abdominal cavity that is anterior to the peritoneum is going to be called intraperitoneal, intra for inside. So why do we have this membrane? Well, one of the reasons is because our intestines are long and they have to be kept in place. So if we didn't have this membrane, by gravity they will go all into the pelvic cavity. And then they move a lot because they're transporting food. So sometimes they can twist and then entangle, and then problems happens, and then someone has to have surgery, but most of the times don't, And one way is just by keeping them with this peritoneal membrane to the back. It's like similar to a rein in a horse. Okay? And then just to show you that many membranes have two layers, they show here the heart, which is this, surrounded by a series of membranes that form a sac, and inside this sac you have fluid. This is called the pericardial fluid. So the membrane folds around the organ, forming a cavity. So if you magnify this part, you can see here the actual tissue of the heart, and this will be the visceral layer, and then this will be the peritoneal layer. Viscerae equals organ. So when they say they're visceral, that means that it is close to the organ. So, in other textbooks, what I have seen is that they have an illustration of having a balloon, either where you have water inside or air, and then someone put a fist against the balloon, and the latex of the balloon that is in contact with the hand, that will be the visceral layer, while the other one that is not in contact with the hand, that will be the peritoneal layer. So here I have folded this microfiber towel. So it's folded, so it has two layers. So if I put it like this layer that it is in contact with my hand, this will be visceral. And this one, that's the other one external to the visceral, will be parietal. And in between, let's say that I have water here, that will be a fluid. It can be peritoneal fluid, it can be pericardial fluid. So that's an example. If you're wearing two pieces of clothing, like the one that is closer to your skin will be the visceral, and the other one will be the parietal. Okay? So, I mean, I see a bunch of people doing this. Well, yeah, because it's thankfully, you're very smart guys. That helps me a lot. Okay, so it means that you are understanding very, very good the material. So then this is the lateral view or mid-sagittal view of all the cavities, not only the posterior but also the anterior. But they're highlighting in yellow color the posterior body cavity. So here we have a posterior body cavity, the cranial, and this will be the vertebral, which is also known as the spinal. And now this is the ventral. So here we have thoracic, and this will be abdominal pelvic. There is a physical division between thoracic and abdominal pelvic. This is the diaphragm. But here, in the abdominal pelvic cavity, there is an imaginary line that actually runs obliquely, so it runs like this, between the promontory of a bone that is called the sacrum and the superior edge of the pubic bones. So it runs like this. So anything below there will be pelvic, and anything between this line and then the diaphragm will be abdominal. The view of the anterior ventral body cavities, the coronal view. So we have right pleural, left pleural, separated by the pericardial cavity and the entire mediastinum, which is all of this. space. Now, here we have the diaphragm, and here we have the abdominal cavity, and this will be the pelvic. And then what cavity is this one? This, in yellow color. Vertebral, and this one? The cranial. Good. Okay, so those were body cavities. Now for making a body, everything starts at the atomic level. So we have many molecules that makes our body, and these molecules are made by certain elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, etc. So we will see that in the next chapter. So these atoms forms molecules, like in this case, this is a phospholipid. A phospholipid, it's a lipid with a head of phosphate groups. And it has a charge, and it has certain chemical structure that in some cases, like, well, it depends on what part of this molecule you're looking at, like the tails of the lipids, they don't interact with water. So this is a non-polar molecule. But the phosphate group, which is polar, can interact with water. So these lipids actually forms membranes, plasma membranes. And then these atoms actually makes 4 major macromolecules. So out of those 4 macromolecules, we form our entire body and the cells. Why? Because some of them, they form a structural function, others just send orders, like with messenger RNA, to specific cells to be formed and have a specific function, shape, etc. So what are the 4 major macromolecules? So our cells in our body are made out of all of this: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids. And the structures in our body, they can have some of those components. So here we have then these phospholipids that makes these cell membranes. And these cell membranes form part of the cells. So this is the cellular level. So we start at the chemical level, which is made by atoms and macromolecules, and then we form parts of the cells, which will be the cellular level, and then cells of different kinds form groups that we know as tissues. And these tissues are located in a particular area, and they have a particular function. Most of you are the tissue of anatomy and physiology. Okay? at least in here. So in this case, this will be what we call an epithelium. You will see later what is that, but it's called stratified squamous epithelium. And this epithelium, which is a layer that protects organs, is actually located in a tube that runs from our mouth into the stomach. This is called the esophagus. So that's the organ level. Tissues form organs. And organs physically or chemically connect to perform a function. So several organs and tissues will form an organ system. And we have 11 organ systems. And those 11 organ systems form an organism. So those are the levels of a structure organization, from atoms to cells to tissues to organ systems to an organism. Here are the names of the organ systems. Integumentary, which includes skin, nails, hair, glands, including the mammary gland. Mammary gland, we will study it in the reproductive system, but it is actually part of the integumentary system. A skeletal system has bones, cartilage, ligaments. Muscular system, it is made out of muscle. We have 3 types of muscle: cardiac, skeletal, and smooth muscle. Nervous system is made out of neurons and supporting cells, which are called the glial cells. So these first 4 systems will be the ones that we will study in AMP1. The rest you will study in AMP2, including endocrine system, which is made by glands and tissues, and their their products, which are hormones. And then cardiovascular system, which includes the heart, blood vessels, and blood. Lymphatic system, which includes lymphatic vessels, ducts, includes primary organs like the thymus, bone marrow, includes the thymus, the spleen, and a fluid that is called the lymph. Respiratory system includes the lungs, nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx or the voice box, and the bronchial tree, the trachea, bronchial tree as well. Digestive system includes many organs, including our teeth, salivary glands, the tongue, our mouth itself is part of the digestive system, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, the colon, large intestine, and then accessory organs like the pancreas, like the gallbladder, the liver. All of those are part of the digestive system. Urinary system includes kidneys, ureters, urethra, and urinary bladder. Some organs are mixed, like they're forming part of one system and the other. In the case of the pancreas is part of the endocrine system, but also of the digestive system. And now, in the case of the reproductive system, it's part of the endocrine system too, because we produce hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, which are sex hormones. But also we produce things that help us to reproduce, like egg cells, sperm cells. And what are the organs of the reproductive system? Ovaries, uterus, fallopian tubes, vagina. In the case of males, will be testes, epididymis, the vas deferens, and the urethra in males, which is part of both reproductive and also urinary system. And the penis is also part of the reproductive system. So major functions of the integumentary system will be to protect the body from the external environment. So with our skin, basically, we prevent from our tissues from drying, because most of the environment is drier than what internally we have, so we don't evaporate so much the water. And then also with the skin, we have sensation, so we can tell whether an object is smooth, whether it's rough. We can sense temperature. We produce vitamin D and regulate the body temperature. That's the maximum, I'm sorry. But remember, you can unload them, okay? Skeletal system is the major support of our body. We have a specific shape because we have the bones. It protects internal organs like the brain, the heart, uterus, etc. It provides leverage for movement. So because we have bones, we don't have to do as much effort to carry certain objects. Of course, we have limits. And then inside our bones, the long bones, we have cavities, and also in flat bones, we have space where we have cells specialized in making blood cells. So it's in charge of hematopoiesis. Store calcium, phosphate. Muscular system function is to produce movement, locomotion, control body openings. Our mouth is surrounded by an sphincter, which help us to close our mouth or open it. Generates heat. When someone is very cold, it starts quivering to generate heat with the contraction of the muscles. Nervous system regulates body functions. responds to stimuli, provides sensation, movement, and automatic functions, like our heart is contracting and we don't know, but it's contracting. It's under involuntary control. And performs higher mental functions, like paying attention, reading, learning, creating memory. Those are higher reasoning, measuring consequences. So those are higher mental functions. And it's made by structures like brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Endocrine system regulates body functions like growth, reproduction, metabolism, digestion. So regulates the function of muscles, glands, and other tissues with chemical messengers known as hormones. So here we have examples of different glands, including pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, thymus, adrenal glands, pancreas, testes, and ovaries. In a way, these organs are not physically connected, most of them. They just, the ones that are not physically connected, they communicate with each other by sending chemical signals, the hormones. Cardiovascular, again made by the bone, the heart, blood vessels, and blood. Pumps and delivers oxygen, pours blood to the lungs so that we can get rid of CO2, which is carbon dioxide. This is a poisonous gas for us. So we need to get rid of it. And then we inhale oxygen so that we can deliver this into the tissues, removes wastes, transport cells, nutrients, and other substances. Lymphatic system picks up excess of fluid that is delivered by the cardiovascular system and returns to it. So it recycles fluid between the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system and the cells. That provides immunity, which is protection against disease. Organs includes the tonsils, lymph nodes, thymus, spleen, lymphatic vessels, and the lymph, and ducts. Respiratory system delivers oxygen to the blood, get rid of carbon dioxide. And maintain acid-base balance. So acid-base balance is related with pH. So this is the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. And then includes nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, lungs. Digestive system is in charge of digesting our food, which is breaking down the food, absorbing nutrients into the blood, removing food that we don't use, removing waste, maintaining fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Electrolyte. Electrolyte, it's an electrically charged molecule capable of conducting an electrical current. So then the previous system, respiratory system, and digestive system also can help with the acid-base balance, which is related to the concentration of hydrogen ions, or pH. And then urinary system includes kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder or ureters, and urethra. I'm tongue-tied besides the accent, guys. I cannot say this word properly. Functions is remove metabolic wastes from the blood, maintaining fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance, just like as the digestive system. And then it stimulates blood production. Like we have these hormones that help us to form red blood cells in the bone marrow. So it helps with hemopoiesis. So this is produced in the kidney, this hormone. And if someone has renal failure, the person won't be able to have enough hemopoiesis. And then reproductive system. In males, organs will be including prostate gland, ductus deferens, vas deferens, testis, penis, epididymis. So you will see more of this in this chapter whenever we cover it. And then for females will be mammary glands, uterine tube, ovary, uterus, and vagina. So functions in the male reproductive system will be to produce and transport sperm cells, secrete hormones like testosterone, and then reproduction. And for female, will be producing and transporting oocytes or egg cells. And then that's the site for fetal development, fetal nourishment, childbirth, and lactation. And then secrete hormones like estrogen, progesterone, prolactin, and also reproduction. So any questions so far? Okay, so for homeostasis. So homeostasis is dynamic equilibrium that help us to maintain stable internal conditions. Our body has many functions with the different organs, and there is in certain functions fluctuation that can go up and down as long as within the range, it's found within the range there is no problem. So that's why it's called dynamic equilibrium. An example is the regulation of body temperature, which we can have normal variation within 1 degree Celsius around the normal body temperature. And then in order to maintain this dynamic equilibrium, we have 2 mechanisms: negative feedback and positive feedback. Most of these functions in our body are regulated by a negative feedback. A negative feedback, it's a feedback or a change that reverses the higher levels of the original function. And positive feedbacks amplify the change. So example of negative feedback will be glucose regulation. Examples of positive feedback will be childbirth. In childbirth, what happens is, for instance, a female who's close to delivery, the female starts getting pains. And those pains first are sporadic and they're mild. But as time passes by, those pains become stronger and more frequent. So that's a positive feedback. So you want more of that change. So you start with a minimum response and then you end up with a large response in positive feedback. And in negative feedback, you start with a large response and then you minimize that response. So here is the example of body temperature control. So our body temperature can fluctuate between 36.1 and 37.2 degrees Celsius, or between 97 and 99 Fahrenheit. That's the normal body temperature. But let's say that someone has an increased body temperature, so it goes above 37.2. Well, we have receptors in the brain, in the hypothalamus, in a region of the brain that is in charge of regulating body temperature, that can sense when the temperature goes up. And then these receptors send a signal to the control center, and that will send a command into an effector. The effector in this case is going to be the blood vessels in our skin and the sweat glands. So when the body temperature is high, the blood circulation in our skin increases and we start producing sweat so that you can evaporate the heat as it goes from higher temperature to lower temperature. And then once you reach the normal body temperature again between 36.1 and 37.2, there is no more need of keep losing body heat. So then that circulation drops. And then you return to normal. So that's homeostasis with negative feedback. Another example of positive feedback, it is blood clotting. We have clothing factors in our body that are inactive. Why? Because and that's when you don't have a wound or an injury. So since they're not needed all the time because you're not bleeding all the time, in that case, these inactive clothing factors don't work. But once you cut a blood vessel, you have an injury in the wall of the blood vessel and you have bleeding, you will have receptors that are found in some cells that are called platelets, And these platelets will start forming a group that's called the platelet plug. And that temporarily seals the damaged wall of the blood vessel, so this is a magnification of this. And then there is a release of chemicals that attracts additional platelets, and then you activate a cascade that forms a net here that will strengthen this wall, and then you start repairing the injury. And then you seal this, and then you get rid of this temporary seal, the blood clot. So you start with very few platelets, and then you end up with more. And same for the clotting factors. So what happens when you lose homeostasis? Like for instance, some people may not have good oxygenation because the membrane in their lungs where gas exchange takes place become thicker. Well, in this case, the person will have poor oxygenation, and then the cells will have what is called hypoxia, lack of oxygen. Now, in physiology, we will deal with studying the movement of molecules, which is called diffusion, or the changes in pressure. And we will have a difference most of the times until you reach equilibrium between compartments with different molecules. And then molecules will move from more to less, from a higher concentration to less concentration, or body temperature as well. And here they give you the example, like the area just nearby the heater will have higher temperature, like in this case will be 80 degrees. And as you move farther away from the heater, the temperature will become lower. So the temperature will move from high to low. And in this case, for this dissolving pill in this beaker, which will have a colorant dye, in this case, when you drop it into the bottom of the beaker, the colorant or the dye will move from the bottom of the beaker, in the water, of course, to the top until you reach equilibrium, until you dissolve the entire pill. And then for pressure, it's like if you have a syringe with a plunger. So inside this syringe, you have this higher pressure, while outside is lower pressure. So as you keep plunging, the air will exit from high to low. And then in physiology, we also have cell-to-cell communication. So some cells communicate by chemical messengers. In this case, it's a neuron with a muscle cell, and that chemical messenger, in this case, is a neurotransmitter. So, what we will study in chapter 2. So we were studying the chemistry of life. So we will see the elements, and then we will see how these elements forms different molecules and how these molecules perform functions in our body. Test your knowledge questions. Which of the following best defines physiology? A study of the structure, a study of disease, a study of the function, or a study of cells? C. In anatomical position, the pons face anteriorly. True or false? The sagittal plane divides the body into front and back portions. False. Second, the distal region of the limbs is closest to the trunk. False. True or false? Distal and proximal region terms apply only to the limbs. True. In the trunk is superior or cephalic and inferior or caudal, but never proximal or distal. Short answer, explain the difference between negative and positive feedback and provide one example of each. You will answer that on your own. We're